Rivers of Babylon, and Daddy Cool, the group became one of the biggest musical acts of the 1970s, dazzling audiences with glitter, glamour, and chart-topping success. But after the fame faded, their story took a darker turn. Behind the disco lights came bitter feuds, shocking secrets, financial struggles, personal tragedies, and heartbreaking losses that few fans ever saw coming. The mastermind behind the magic, Frank Farian, and the birth of Boney M. Here's the thing about Boney M that most casual fans don't know. The group was never supposed to be a group. It was a disguise, a very profitable, very sparkly disguise. The man behind the curtain was Frank Farian, a German singer and songwriter who had been plugging away at a music career in the Schlager genre, that very European style of dreamy, emotion-heavy pop, with next to nothing to show for it. His releases on the Hansa label were going nowhere fast. So Frank, being the shrewd operator he was, decided to try something completely different. In 1974, he recorded a funky, irresistible disco track called Baby Do You Wanna Bump. It was nothing like his previous work, all driving beat, infectious melody, and a deep bass vocal that Frank sang himself. The Hansa label loved it and wanted to release it as a single. But Frank had a problem. He'd spent years building a name as a Schlager artist. He couldn't exactly put his own face on a disco record without confusing his existing audience and torpedoing his reputation. So he invented an alias. The name came from an Australian detective series he'd spotted on German television. The show featured a character nicknamed Boney, short for Napoleon Bonaparte. Frank liked the sound of it, tweaked the spelling, and Boney M was born. The single was credited to this mysterious new act, and by the end of 1975 it was climbing charts in the Netherlands. When a Dutch TV station wanted Boney M to come perform the song, Frank faced his next problem. He couldn't go on stage as himself. So he did what any self-respecting pop Svengali would do. He built a band. He recruited Maisie Williams from Montserrat, Marsha Barrett from Jamaica, and an Aruban dancer named Bobby Farrell to be the face, body, and soul of his creation. When the first lineup shifted, Frank brought in Liz Mitchell, another Jamaican singer, to complete the classic quartet we know today. And just like that, Boney M was ready to conquer the world. And conquer it they absolutely did. But while the world was screaming their names and buying their records, what exactly was going on behind those sequin costumes? Because there was a secret at the heart of Boney M that, once it came out, would change everything. The Lip SYNC secret. Fame built on a beautiful lie. Let's get into it, because this is the part that makes the whole Boney M story so fascinatingly complicated. The group that millions of fans were watching on stage, mouthing lyrics and shimmying in their platform shoes, several of them weren't actually singing a single note of those records. Frank Farian sang the deep, distinctive male vocals on Boney M studio recordings himself. All those iconic bass lines you hear on Daddy Cool, Rasputin, Rivers of Babylon, that was Frank in the studio, not Bobby Farrell. Liz Mitchell confirmed this publicly. Only she, Marsha Barrett, and Farian had sung on the hit recordings. Bobby, for all his extraordinary stage energy, was essentially miming Frank's voice to packed arenas every night. And Bobby wasn't the only one. Maisie Williams, despite being one of the founding members and a constant presence on every stage, didn't sing on the studio recordings either. Farian would later say in a 1978 interview with Bravo magazine that her voice simply wasn't suited for that style of music. So the hits were sung by Frank, Liz, and Marsha, while Bobby and Maisie performed live. The rest, as they say, is history, complicated, contested, lawsuit-generating history. Now, to be fair, lip-syncing to pre-recorded tracks was far more common in the 70s than people like to admit, and it wasn't exactly a guarded state secret within the industry. But Farian's arrangement was unusually extreme. He was literally performing the male lead vocals on global chart toppers while the credited frontman danced and mimed. When the full truth became public knowledge in 1978, it created a controversy that would simmer for years. Bobby Farrell was reportedly furious when Farian publicly confirmed the arrangement. And who could blame him? He was the face of the band, the showman, the personality that sold the whole act, and he was getting none of the credit for the actual recordings. Tensions between Bobby and Farian escalated steadily throughout the late 70s and early 80s, until things finally came to a head. The lip-syncing saga didn't just damage trust with fans. It planted seeds of resentment among the members themselves that would eventually tear the group apart. And it wasn't just Bobby who would feel exploited. Maisie Williams spent years fighting just to prove she had the right to be paid for records she'd spent a decade helping to promote. So with all of that simmering behind the scenes, how long could a group like this actually hold together? The answer, it turns out, was about 10 years. And when Boney M finally fell apart, the lives that followed could not have been more different for each of those 4 original members. Bobby Farrow, the showman who lost everything. If there is one story in the Boney M saga that hits hardest, it is the story of Bobby Farrow, because this was a man who gave everything to an act that, in the coolest twist, left him with almost nothing. Robert Alfonso Farrow was born on October 6, 1949, in San Nicolas, Aruba. He left the island at 15 to work as a sailor, spent 2 years at sea, then drifted through Norway and the Netherlands before eventually landing in Germany, where he made a modest living as a DJ. That's where Frank Farian spotted him, this tall, magnetic, impossibly charismatic dancer who could own any room he walked into. Bobby became the visual centerpiece of Boney M from the very beginning. His extraordinary stage presence, those wild dance moves, that enormous afro, Bobby was the image people associated with the band worldwide. But cracks appeared early. In 1978, when Farian confirmed publicly that Bobby's voice hadn't been used on the studio recordings, Bobby was reportedly devastated and enraged. He felt used and humiliated, marketed as a voice of a group whose actual voice belonged to someone else entirely. The rift between him and Farian deepened through the early 80s until Bobby left the group in 1981 following a serious falling out. He was replaced by a singer named Regit Sebo. For the first time, Bobby tried to record music that actually featured his own voice. But it was a struggle. The world knew him as a dancing frontman of Boney M, not as a solo recording artist. He couldn't escape the shadow of the group, but he was no longer in it. He rejoined Boney M in 1984 and performed with them until the band officially split in 1986. What came after was genuinely heartbreaking. According to Bobby's daughter, Zanilia Farrow, her father had signed away all rights to Boney M's music, meaning he received no royalties from those 100 million records, none of the income from a catalog that was still being played and licensed around the world. The financial consequences were catastrophic. Bobby and his family were forced to move in with his mother in the Netherlands, and at points relied on welfare to get by. Zanilia said publicly that her father had lost everything, and that it made him deeply angry and frustrated. The one saving grace was a legal loophole. Because Frank Farian hadn't registered the Boney M name in every territory, Bobby could still perform under that name in certain countries. He formed his own touring group and spent his later years playing nostalgia shows, keeping himself in the game the only way he still could. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him on stage, and the stage was where Bobby Farrow felt most alive. He had married Jasmina Shaban in 1981, and together they had 2 children, a daughter and a son, before separating in 1995. His daughter Zanilia would later become a musician herself, one of the few genuinely bright threads in an otherwise bleak final chapter of Bobby's life. Then came December 30th, 2010. Bobby was in St. Petersburg, Russia, performing at a corporate event. He reportedly told those around him that he wasn't feeling well, breathing problems, chest pains. The next morning, hotel staff found him unresponsive in his room at the Ambassador Hotel. He was 61 years old. Russian investigators confirmed the cause of death as heart failure. Bobby had suffered from heart problems, breathing difficulties, and stomach issues for the better part of a decade, according to his agent John Sain. The timing of his death sent a chill through everyone who knew his story. Bobby Farrow, the man who had famously portrayed Grigory Rasputin in one of Boney M's biggest hits, died on December 30th, in the very city of St. Petersburg, where Rasputin himself had been killed on that exact same date in 1916. The coincidence is so eerie it almost defies belief. He was buried in Amsterdam. Bobby Farrow deserved better. He was a personality, the energy, the face that put Boney M on posters in bedrooms around the world. The circumstances he found himself in at the end of his life, financially broken, fighting to perform under a name he'd helped make famous, represent one of the saddest chapters in pop music history. But Bobby's story, as tragic as it is just one part of this picture. Because the women of Boney M each carried their own weight of loss, struggle, and sheer determination. Let's talk about the one member Frank Farian once said was irreplaceable. Liz Mitchell, the voice that kept going. Feuds once said something that tells you everything you need to know about Liz Mitchell's importance to Boney M. All members could be replaced, except Liz. High praise from a man who literally built the group from scratch and controlled every aspect of its sound. And given what we now know about the recording arrangements, that statement carries even more weight, because Liz really was a voice. Her vocals are all over those classic records. Elizabeth Mitchell was born in Clarendon, Jamaica, and moved to London with her family at the age of 11 in 1963. It was significant uprooting for a young girl, but London gave her access to a music scene that would shape her entire life. By the late 1960s, she had landed a role in the musical Hair, which took her all the way to West Berlin, where, in a wonderfully strange piece of pop history, she replaced a young Donna Summer in the show. After Hair, she joined the Les Humphreys Singers, which gave her experience performing across Europe. The call that changed everything came in 1976. A booking agency invited her to join this new group called Boney M. She was initially reluctant. She described herself as more of a solo artist type, but she said yes, and the rest is history. Liz became the sonic heart of the group, the voice behind the biggest moments, the constant. She remained with Boney M through every lineup change, every internal drama, right until the group disbanded in 1986. After the split, Liz did what she had always done. She kept working. She tried initially to maintain some version of Boney M with other former members, but the legal and personal complications made that difficult. She eventually pivoted fully to a solo career and, with her husband, opened Dove House Studios in 1996 as a base for recording new music. She released her solo debut, Share the World, in 1999 and followed it with Christmas album Christmas Rose in 2000, a faith-influenced album called Let It Be Followed in 2004. To this day, Liz tours extensively under the billing Boney M, featuring Liz Mitchell, a name that has Farian's backing and, in his view, represents a legitimate continuation of the group. She continues to sell out shows across Europe and beyond, bringing a new generation of fans into contact with music that remains genuinely beloved. In 2014, a blue heritage plaque was placed at her childhood home in London to honor her musical achievements. And in 2024, she was awarded a Member of the Order of the British Empire, an MBE, for her contributions to music and charity. At 71 years old, Liz Mitchell is still one of the most recognizable and active voices from that entire era of pop music. Her story is one of professionalism, resilience, and a quiet determination to keep showing up. She didn't get the splashiest headlines, didn't end up in the most dramatic legal battles, and didn't suffer the most devastating personal losses. But she held the line, year after year, decades after most acts from her era had faded completely from public consciousness. And the music world is richer for it. Now, if Lizzie's post-Boney M life is a story of quiet perseverance, then Marsha Barrett's is something else entirely, because this woman stared down an enemy far more frightening than any music industry dispute, and she did it more than once. Marsha Barrett, 6 cancers and still standing. Marsha Barrett was born on October 14, 1948, in St. Catherine Parish, Jamaica, and came to England as a teenager. She moved to Germany in the late 1960s and began building a music career from the ground up, touring with established artists, releasing her first single, Could Be Love, in 1971, and making a name for herself singing covers of hits like Son of a Preacher Man and Big Spender. When she joined Boney M in 1975, she finally had the platform her talent deserved. Her voice was one of the genuine instruments at the heart of the group's sound. She sang lead on certain tracks and was all over the harmonies and backing vocals that gave Boney M their rich, lush sound. Frank Farian himself relied heavily on her in the studio. So when Boney M disbanded, losing that platform was a real blow, not just professionally, but financially. Marsha has spoken openly about the fact that no royalties came in from Boney M's million-selling catalog. She and her husband went through genuine hardship in the years that followed. And then, on top of everything else, came the health crisis that would define much of the next 2 decades of her life. Shortly after the group disbanded, while Marsha was in Munich working on new rock material, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She fought it, recovered, and tried to rebuild her solo career. But the disease came back, and then it came back again, and again. In total, Marsha Barrett battled cancer 6 times, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. 6 separate fights with a disease that takes most people once. There were periods when she could barely work. There were periods when she had to learn to walk again. She has described seeing children with bald heads in cancer wards and using that as a reason not to feel sorry for herself. That kind of perspective, hard one, deeply human, runs through everything she says about those years. In a radio interview in 2001, she summed it up simply and unforgettably, life after Boney M. My dear, I've been through hell and back. But she came back, every single time. By 1997, she was back in the studio working with producer Scott Christina. Her album Survival arrived in 1999, and if ever a title was earned, it was that one. A second album, Come Into My Life, followed in 2005. She attended the London and Berlin premieres of the Daddy Cool musical in 2007. She founded her own record label, Zoa Records, in 2009. She published a memoir, Forward, My Life With and Without Boney M, in 2018, a book that is, by all accounts, remarkable in its warmth, candor, and complete lack of bitterness. Today, Marsha Barrett is cancer-free. She lives with her husband Marcus James, a guitarist formerly of Eddie Grant's band, whom she married in 1984. She continues to make music on her own terms. Her story is, without question, one of the most extraordinary survival stories in pop music history, and it deserves to be told far more widely than it has been. Marsha's battles were fought largely out of the public eye, with a dignity and resilience that is genuinely awe-inspiring. But the final member of our original quartet had a very different kind of fight on her hands, one that played out in courtrooms and legal documents rather than hospitals. And she won that one too. Maisie Williams, the original member who had to fight to be recognized. Here is a detail about Boney M that often gets lost in the broader story. Maisie Williams was there first. She was the very first member recruited to be the face of Frank Farian's new project, approached by a music agent at a restaurant in Hanover, Germany, in 1975, while she was out with her friend Sheila Bonnick. Before Liz Mitchell joined, before the classic lineup was complete, Maisie was already there, performing and touring.